So I'm here with Alex Edmans, Professor of Finance at London Business School and author of Grow the Pie, How Great Companies Deliver Both Purpose and Profit. And Alex is also just coming to the end of a 4-year term as the Mercer School Memorial Professor of Business at Gresham College, in which role he explains business and academic insights to the general public. So Alex, thanks very much for joining me. We're doing this as part of a series on ECGI's Responsible Capitalism initiative. To start with, what does responsible capitalism mean to you?
Well, thanks for inviting me, Tom. So to me, responsible capitalism is a business that's driven to serve wider society. So the company does need to make a profit, but it sees profit as a byproduct of creating value for society, not the end goal. So how can you make profits? It could be by making innovative products that transform customers' lives for the better, through providing employees with a healthy and enriching workplace so they're motivated and productive, but not through doing things like making products that cause customer addiction or mis-selling, say, a financial product because customers don't fully understand it.
And so, I mean, it's a topic that's talked about a lot. People have strong views on it, but what are the most common mistakes that you think people make when talking about responsible capitalism?
Unfortunately, I think there's quite a lot of mistakes that people make, and I know that we haven't got all day, so let me just limit myself to 3. So I think the first one is people think responsible capitalism is not about profit, and indeed some companies might say, oh, we're so responsible, we don't really care about our shareholders. But actually, a big responsibility is to deliver returns to shareholders, because who are they? They're not nameless, faceless capitalists. They are people like you and I, so saving for retirement. They are pension funds, they're insurance companies and so forth, so profit should be achieved in addition to social value. I think a second mistake is people often view responsibility as doing no harm. So we're not mistreating our workers, we're not underpaying taxes, we're not polluting the environment. And absolutely, that is part of responsibility, but I think for most companies, the main responsible thing they can do is actively doing good through excellence in their core business. So for me as a professor, what do I think is the most responsible action I do? Not necessarily that I bike to my lectures rather than driving, but trying to make sure that my lectures are practical and relevant and updated. I think that creates so much more value than me reducing the carbon footprint of my commute. And I think the third and final one I'll stress is we often think about responsibility as solving problems. And certainly solving problems is something that many companies should do, but I think it's rather narrow because what a responsible business does is that it creates value. And what's the difference? Well, there's many industries which create a huge amount of value and make lives better and make humans flourish without necessarily solving a problem. For example, the media and entertainment industry, that makes a huge difference. The World Cup has a big carbon footprint. That doesn't solve any problem, but that causes lots of people to dream and to think about spending more time doing sport. It would be just similar to saying at a university, we should scrap humanities and arts and history and only do economics and medicine and law. And I do think that, yes, we do need to solve problems, and I don't want to sort of belittle the gravity of the world's problems, but I do think part of what companies should do is actively create value and just make the world a more fun and flourishing place to live in.
Those last two of the 3 that you mentioned do link to this question of the purpose of the corporation and what it's really about. And I find it very powerful what you say about companies adding value through their core business rather than necessarily stuff that's ancillary to it. But purpose has become a bit of a buzzword that means different things to different people. I mean, how do you think about corporate purpose and its role?
So how I define it is why a company exists, who it serves, its reason for being, and the role that it plays in the world. And that might seem a bit lofty and idealistic, so let me pick it apart. So I think the first thing is purpose is about service. So what this means is that intrinsically it's about making the world better. So even if you didn't think about profit, right, what would you want the company to do? You'd want it to create value. It's just like how does a person think about his or her purpose? They think about their ambition, what job they'd love to do. For some people it might be to be a firefighter, others it might be a teacher, others it could be to be an investment banker because they want to be a trusted advisor to clients. But why do you want to do it? Because you love that job. And then if you get paid as a byproduct, then that is something which is seen as a byproduct, but that's not the core purpose. So the first point is it's about service, and yes, you do want to be profitable, but that's a byproduct of serving society. And the second thing is that purpose needs to be focused. So why you exist and who you serve that can't be to solve every single one of the world's problems. And if I was allowed to talk about a fourth mistake that people make about when they think about responsibility, it's they try to be all things to all people, when actually when you think about a person's purpose, it would be to be a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher, not all of them. And even with a charity, right, we know what he says to the American Cancer Society: why are you not reducing animal rights animal welfare issues? Well, that's not their problem. They're focused on cancer research and making sure they do that really, really well.
Okay, and the first kind of issue that you made, that you referred to, was sort of ignoring the fact that it's important for a business to create profits in order to serve its shareholders as well as other stakeholders, and indeed to enable it to serve other stakeholders. And this very much links to a theme that runs through a lot of your work and indeed forms the title of your book, which is this concept of growing the pie. Can you just sort of explain what you mean by this pie growing as opposed to pie splitting mentality?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just explain what the pie is to begin with. That's the amount of social value that a company creates, and that can be divided between profits to investors and value to society, and that could be things like wages to workers, fair taxes to the government, fair prices to customers. So often people have the fixed pie mindset. So who might have that mindset? On the one hand, it might be executives who have that mindset, and they think to maximise profits, I need to take from society through paying employees as little as possible and underpaying tax. But importantly, it could be business reformers who also have this fixed pie mindset, who say, well, in order to repurpose business and make sure it serves society, we need to crack down on profits through heavy regulation and a lot of restrictions. But that doesn't work either, because, as I was discussing earlier, profits are a key part of a society. So what is the pie growing mindset? It's the acknowledgement that in many cases, and particularly in the long term, stakeholders and shareholders are not in competition. So if a company chooses to create value for society, such as making innovative products because it solves a social problem, rather than thinking, is this something that's going to make me money? Often down the line, if you are creating value, people are willing to pay you for it and you're able to monetize it. And suddenly when I think about treating my workers better, yes, there's certain things where I can clearly see a link to profit. Maybe I paid my worker a bit more, then he or she would not leave to a competitor. But when I think about other things, which is, do I want to give my employee the chance to present at this meeting, even though it's really important? Maybe I think I should do it. Well, no, I think this is important for his or her development. Do I choose to give them flexible time, working policies or parental leave? Often when you do things for intrinsic reasons, to grow the pie, to create value for your employees, ultimately it can lead to profits, even in ways that you never anticipated.
And I think that this concept of that actually many more actions than we think can grow the pie, and many more actors play a role in growing the pie than are commonly assumed. And that's a big theme of a lot of your research. But of course it doesn't always work that way, and sometimes there are kind of trade-offs between either shareholders and stakeholders, or even within stakeholder groups. So how does a pie-growing company decide on those trade-offs?
I think the first thing is to acknowledge them, and I think that is really important, because otherwise it's really easy to say everything you do to help society always increases profits, and then you never need to make these tough decisions. But sometimes these tough decisions exist, and the evidence also suggests that sometimes there are trade-offs. So first, to acknowledge that is really important. And then I think it's to have a set of frameworks, a set of principles to guide what you will do when there is a trade-off. If I indeed could create a lot of value for society, but it's going to cost me, will I do that? Now, in the book, I come up with a set of principles, but that's not to say those are the only set of principles. It could be that another company might think of some other principles, but it is useful to have a set, otherwise it's completely arbitrary. So I'll just share a couple of my principles, and maybe those will resonate with some audiences and maybe they won't. But one of them is comparative advantage. So if there's something that a company can do to serve society where it won't bear out in profits, is it something that the company has a huge amount of expertise in? Because why is that useful? Because it means that even if there's a cost in terms of profits, the amount of social value you can create could be massive because it's something which you have expertise in. So let me give a few examples. So in the pandemic, there were companies which initially were, say, alcohol companies, and then pivoting to make sanitizer and giving them away for free. So that's clearly costly. It reduces their profits, but the reduction was not that huge, given they already had expertise with alcohol-based products. And for me, when I think about, well, how do I try to serve society? Do I work in a soup kitchen and help the homeless? I don't, and that's not because I don't think homelessness is a serious issue. It is, but I don't think that would be fully using my skills. So that's why I took this Gresham College position, where you give free lectures to the public to make, say, complex financial concepts accessible to a general audience. That does what I'm focused on and I have experience in.
Okay. And so as we kind of draw this to a close, I mean, based on your research and your experience engaging with multiple audiences around the world on your book, what are some of the key insights about responsible capitalism that you'd like to leave with our audience?
I think I'll go with 3, just like I had 3 in terms of mistakes. So I think the first one is there are win-wins, as you were saying, Tom. So this idea that you can benefit both stakeholders and shareholders is something which is backed up by evidence, it's backed up by real-world case studies and so forth. So many things that you might do for purely altruistic reasons in the long term do benefit you in terms of shareholder value. But the second is, the flip side, is there are trade-offs. And there are cases in which people might want to torture the data to get the result that they want, which is this social action always creates value in the long term, but that's just disingenuous, and that actually leads to worse decisions, because if we don't actually realise that some decisions might end up being costly, it could be that you're a company that pursues responsibility and then forgets about profit, and we've seen companies like Danone get into trouble for not being fully focused on profits. I think the final insight is that a lot of these trade-offs can be resolved by taking a long-term versus short-term approach. So we often conflate 2 different issues. So one is stakeholders versus shareholders, and the other is the short-term versus the long-term. So many people who think about responsible capitalism or stakeholder capitalism, they think it's anti-shareholder capitalism. It's shareholders versus stakeholders. So how do we implement this? We reduce shareholder power, we put workers on the boards instead, and so forth. We make sure pay is not aligned to the stock price. But in fact, if I'm right that in the long term, many of these things are aligned, then actually the solution is to give the company a more long-term mindset, not an anti-shareholder mindset. So something that both you and I have worked on is, if you want to reform CEO pay, maybe you don't need to move it away from the stock price, but make sure it's based on the stock price maybe in 5 or 7 years' time, by giving the CEO shares that he or she can't sell for many years and might even have to hold after his or her retirement.
Alex, thanks for those terrific insights. It's been great to have this conversation with you.
Thanks so much for inviting me.